You guys found something? What did you see?
Legs, and you can see toe with a foot, like bone.
Like a person?
Like a human?
Yeah.
The body is discovered at the bottom of an embankment.
Oh yeah, it's human.
Though.
It's an indication that it's very personal and potentially a crime of passion.
We're a complete shock. There will be no reason for her to be murdered.
We discovered there seems to be some sort of love triangle, and she's involved in it. I start confronting him with what we found on his cell phone. He was just adamant that he did not see her, he wasn't there.
I believe her words are, "I don't want to go down for this." At that point, she tells us her final version of what happened.
She felt very much betrayed by him.
When there's emotions involved, it doesn't take much to start a storm.
It just really turns into a blame game.
Monday, July 13th, 2020, Waterbury, Connecticut. At 9:36 a.m., police receive a panicked phone call from a New York resident.
Waterbury Police, dispatcher 428.
Yes, my friend, I'm calling because we can't get hold of my friend.
We get a call from a Galani Madongo, and he is located in Staten Island, New York at the time, and he's concerned for his girlfriend, Rachel Sabatala.
She lived in Waterbury and worked in the area past the CNA.
I last spoke to her on Friday night.
Was there anything wrong?
We had just said a notification, you know.
You guys got into an argument then?
Yes.
He reported that he had an argument with her and hadn't heard from her in 2 days.
Okay, you're looking to do a wellness check?
Yes.
All right, we're going to send an officer out there as soon as possible.
Our patrol division responds to Rachel's apartment.
Nobody was home, so a landlord allowed them access into the apartment, but they didn't find anything out of the ordinary.
And at that point, we learned Rachel had a roommate.
But she had been away for weeks as a traveling nurse.
Rachel's roommate hadn't heard from her.
We reach out to all the hospitals in the area, and Rachel wasn't there.
As soon as police arrive back at headquarters, they reach out to Rachel's family to gain more insight into the 33-year-old's life.
Rachel's parents, they lived in a remote part of South Africa, and they would wait by the phone for an arranged phone call they had each week, typically 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. on Sundays. And around July 10th, the Sunday following, she never called.
And we spoke to her sister, who also informed us that she hadn't heard from her for a period of time as well.
Obviously, they were very concerned. It was not, her normal being to not make contact. So try to, piece together who she was and learn about her life and what she did.
Born and raised in Ikahang, South Africa, Rachel Lorado Sebetlela moved to the United States in 2012.
She was here working at various jobs to support her family back home.
I first met Rachel back in, I would say, late 2019, early 2020. She was a nurse's aide. She used to live in New York, and then she came down to Connecticut. We worked as caregivers, and I worked for a nursing agency caring for elderlies. And Rachel did the same thing. She got along with everyone that she worked with. Everybody loved Rachel because she was very quiet, very reserved. But once she got to know you and open up to you, then it was just welcoming. And to spend time with Rachel, you will love her because she always had this beautiful smile on her face, very jovial, very, very fun. I saw Rachel the week before, and she told me she was going to be taking time off for her birthday. I was looking forward for her coming back. So as the time went on, I realized that she was not back. And I kept querying, where is she? Why is she not back? When more than a week went on, we were just like, wait a minute. It's a little kind of weird because she doesn't take off that long unless she's going back home.
Over the course about the next couple weeks, there's calls from a few more friends expressing some concern.
So the officers thought it best to file a missing persons complaint.
We were able to put a ping out on Rachel's phone to try to locate her, but there was nothing coming back. The phone was off. There's no signal.
As Waterbury detectives dig deeper into Rachel's life, they discover that she had filed a report with the New York City Police Department just 3 days before Galani reported her missing.
At this point, all we had was that her and Galani had a domestic issue right around July 10th.
Galani lived in Staten Island. She had been spending some time with him there on her break from work.
So a handful of detectives responded out to Staten Island, spoke with the NYPD.
There was a confrontation, an argument, and Rachel called the police.
Knowing the history that they just had a domestic, we were concerned that Galani could have potentially been involved in Rachel's disappearance.
According to the report, Rachel claimed she feared for her life when a screaming match broke out between the couple.
So there was a police response from NYPD of an argument they had, and we were able to view some body camera footage from the New York officers that showed Rachel leaving there from New York.
She did end up taking a ride back to the city of Waterbury, and we were able to confirm that ride through her Uber records.
So we started to tighten our time frame as to when something possibly could have happened to her here in Waterbury.
6 weeks pass with no new developments in Rachel's disappearance, so detectives attempt to locate Rachel's cell phone again.
We did a ping again, and this time we were getting a location, and that ping was coming back to Galani's residence. So now we were highly suspicious.
Detectives immediately travel to Galani's New York apartment. Inside, they find Galani, but Rachel is nowhere to be found.
They make contact with Galani, but he explains that he was actually the owner of Rachel's phone.
He tells detectives that he had taken the SIM card out of her phone and replaced it into another phone.
So it wasn't Rachel using the phone, he was using it.
He definitely wasn't helping his cause by removing SIM cards. We thought, was he trying to cover his tracks?
So that made us that much more suspicious of Galani.
However, detectives see no sign of foul play at Galani's residence.
So our initial thoughts were that maybe Galani was involved in, harming her, but we didn't have the evidence we need to figure out what happened to her.
We don't have a body, so we're just trying to really figure out what's going on at this point.
Over the next month, concerns continue to mount.
Then in the end of August of 2020, her roommate, who had been out of town for some time, came home.
When she made her way back to the apartment, she realized that something seemed off.
I believe plastic bags, paper towels were missing. There was a rug near the bathroom area that was missing.
She even thought that there may have been some blood splatter by the sink area. It alarmed her enough to call us.
We ended up doing a search and seizure warrant for Rachel's apartment. And when we executed that search warrant, our forensic division assists us with that.
Forensic technicians sprayed some luminol, and it was positive for a blood-like substance.
There was blood splatter seen on a radiator, in the cabinets near the sink, and some on the floor as well. There's a tremendous amount of blood showing up through these agents in her kitchen.
We begin to really realize that foul play is involved.
And although we don't have a body, as an investigator, that tells us that something definitely happened in that kitchen, and it appeared that somebody attempted to clean up a crime scene potentially.
He was more than a missing person. Now it was treated as more of a homicide.
Coming up, a harrowing discovery in the woods confirms detectives' worst fears.
Looks like a deep cavity.
Taped up, legs are taped up.
And as the search for a killer intensifies, a deadly affair becomes the focus of the case.
She was a jealous female, and at that point they begin planning her death.
More than a month after Rachel Sebet-Layla was reported missing by her boyfriend Galani Madongo, traces of blood have been discovered in her apartment, suggesting that a violent attack occurred inside.
Once we see the amount of blood that's there, we're starting to lean more towards a homicide investigation at this point. But we don't have a body.
There weren't really any breaks in the case until September 12th.
Watertown Police Dispatch.
Okay. In Black Rock.
You're in Black Rock?
Yeah. I think I found a dead body.
Black Rock is located in Watertown, Connecticut. It's a town over from us here in Waterbury. The area is right off the highway.
It's a desolate area. There's not a lot of people around there.
Somebody walking in the woods believed he discovered human remains.
Watertown police call neighboring departments to see if they have any missing people, and that's why they called Waterbury PD.
We thought, is there a chance that this could be Rachel? So we sent major crime detectives out there.
You guys found something?
Yeah.
What did you see?
Legs, and you can see tell with the foot, like bone.
Like a person? Like a human?
Yeah.
And you called right away?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
The body is discovered at the bottom of an embankment.
Bones. That's why come down to you want some cuts.
Yeah.
It was wrapped in a series of blankets and black trash bags.
Looks like it's in a cavity. This is a shirt?
Yeah, taped up. Legs are
Taped up?
Okay. Yeah, legs are taped up.
It was badly decomposed. The hands were bound, the feet were bound.
The state of decomposition suggests that the body has been there for 2 months.
All right, I'm gonna pull out where the head would be. Oh yeah, it's definitely a skeleton.
We got there.
Oh yeah, it's human. I don't see a head.
I don't see a head though.
There was no head attached to the torso.
They do a general search of the entire area, seeing if they could find additional remains. 30 or 40 feet away, they found the remains of her skull.
But it was badly decomposed, making it difficult to determine who the person could be. But one detective did recognize the fingernails.
During the course of the investigation, we recovered one of Rachel's iPads. And when we looked through the iPad, she had taken a selfie, and in that selfie, she had those exact same fake nails.
It was a very distinctive manicure. Her nails were painted in green and yellow.
So we had a strong feeling that it was Rachel.
The body was brought to the office of the chief medical examiner, and we were able to identify those remains as Rachel's.
So an autopsy was completed, and we determined that Rachel had suffered from multiple stab wounds. So we knew the death was horrific.
What was indicative of her being stabbed was that the shirt she had on her had 17 defects. And there's also a rib that was nicked, and there were cuts in her diaphragm. All this evidence indicated to law enforcement that she died in the apartment and her body was dumped after that.
It's believed that the head was detached from animal activity.
Following the autopsy, detectives make the difficult call to Rachel's family in South Africa.
Rachel's family, once they learned of Rachel's death, they were obviously shocked, obviously saddened.
I heard about it at work, and we all broke down. We all started crying. We were in complete shock. There will be no reason for her to be murdered.
When we see the results of the autopsy and we see how many times Rachel's stabbed, it's an indication that it's very personal and potentially a crime of passion.
So our thought was it was someone close to her.
Galani was a person of interest. He was the last person that had seen her. He had reported her missing.
When detectives call Galani in for questioning, they break the news of Rachel's death to him.
He was extremely upset at the circumstances that are disclosed.
Galani insists he had nothing to do with Rachel's murder. However, he does reveal one detail he had previously withheld from detectives.
He stated earlier in the year, he discovered that Rachel was having an affair with another individual, Miles Johnson.
They had met at a job. They both worked together and had struck up a relationship.
Galani found out about the initial affair through Rachel's telephone. Galani and Rachel spoke about it. Rachel told Galani that they were no longer seeing each other. But later in the year, Galani, through Rachel's phone, saw that there was still contact with Miles.
He had discovered text messages on her phone between Rachel and Miles, reconfirming they had started their relationship again.
He had an argument with Rachel, but he said that no matter what, he had still loved her and he was trying to make amends.
We're gathering all this information that's leading us to believe that Galani's responsible for what happened to Rachel.
With no direct evidence tying him to Rachel's death, police allow Galani to walk after he provides a written statement.
They felt that he was believable. Maybe he was, in fact, just a concerned boyfriend. So at this point in the investigation, we kind of put Galani on hold for a bit.
Detectives immediately turn their attention to Miles Johnson, the man with whom Rachel was allegedly having an affair.
Law enforcement is able to find Miles Johnson because they pull Rachel's call log, the last people that she was in contact with before she disappeared, and they find that the last number that she talked to was Miles Johnson.
So from there, we made contact with Miles Johnson, and he agrees to come in and speak with detectives.
It just turned our investigation into a different angle.
Less than a week after 33-year-old Rachel Sebet-Leila's remains were found in a Connecticut state park, police have learned she was having an affair with her co-worker, Miles Johnson. On September 18th, detectives interview Miles.
We didn't give Miles any indication that Rachel was dead at the moment. I explained to him how we have concerns for Rachel, how she's been missing, and we're just wondering what he might know at this point.
And we start to learn a little bit more about some of the things that were going on in his life at that point in time.
The 22-year-old worked as a phlebotomist in Waterbury.
I started working with Miles in December of 2019 at the very end. We were mobile phlebotomists, so our job was to go in different locations and take blood samples from people. You get to meet all new sorts of new people, and he was a very personable person. Miles got along with everybody. He just had this presence, and he actually had wanted to eventually become a doctor.
While Miles began to work there, we all kind of will congregate together during certain social activities inside the facility. So it was a time to really get to know him. His mother was from Jamaica and his father was Spanish.
He was a pretty cool guy, actually. Very fun to talk to. He was an all-around pretty likable guy. And he was an attractive young man. And the other phlebotomists, they fawned over him when he started.
Miles and Rachel started out as friends. It was never anything serious in the beginning. And as time went on, the communication intensified.
Their work relationship evolved into a sexual relationship.
She liked Miles. She liked where it was going. Rachel was older than Miles, so she would make jokes and says, okay, my young thing is calling me.
In February of 2020, he said to me that he was trying to find something that he wanted to get this particular girl something for Valentine's Day. And I says, oh, I didn't know you had a girlfriend. And he says, no, we're just kind of seeing each other. But she has another guy, and this guy is kind of a jerk, and he keeps trying to get between us.
Miles Johnson was having a relationship with Rachel, but he too had a girlfriend at the time, while Rachel was obviously in a dating relationship with Galani.
So Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario were dating for a period of time, maybe over the course of a couple years.
It seems like, Miles was trying to cover his tracks, trying to maybe keep his relationships open with both women.
So we ask him if he had any kind of contact with Rachel around July 10th, July 11th. And that's when he indicates that on July 10th, he was caught by Galani Madongo. On that day, Galani reached out to him and began to tell him how he found out about the relationship. And then Miles acknowledged making a phone call to Rachel at midnight, but he denied being at Rachel's apartment around that time or even being in the area.
When detectives reveal that Rachel has been found murdered, Miles is seemingly taken off guard.
He was shocked, so there wasn't too much suspicion. He was cooperative.
He denied any involvement in Rachel's murder.
At this point, we just don't have too much information that would point us in the direction of Miles. So we eventually reach out to his girlfriend, Cassandra, because we know that there seems to be some sort of love triangle, and she's involved in it.
She went down to the police department voluntarily, and they asked her about herself.
23-year-old Cassandra Nazario was born and raised in the Bronx.
Cassandra really never got in trouble. She was an exceptional student. She was like a bubbly person. She's really funny, very playful, very curious, and free. And as an adult, she was just wanting to be successful and help people. So she got into healthcare. She started working as a certified nurse's assistant.
Both Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario were working together.
I did not know Cassandra very well. She did not work alongside me or Rachel. She was new into the mix.
I first heard about Miles when she came and brought him over and we met him. And he was quiet, but Cassandra seemed happy. I think she was in love, or what her interpretation was of being in love, and she enjoyed being in a relationship with him.
When detectives ask Cassandra about her boyfriend's affair with Rachel, Cassandra admits she knew.
Cassandra explains to detectives that Galani had reached out to her and, told her that, listen, there's an affair going on with your boyfriend and my girlfriend.
She seemed to be very upset at Miles because she stated to me that she was a very good girlfriend to him.
Detectives asked her about her involvement in this, and she denied any involvement, and she actually gave an alibi to Miles Johnson, saying they were home watching movies the night Rachel went missing.
So at that point in time, we kind of left it at that with her.
In order to eliminate the two men in Rachel's life as persons of interest, detectives subpoena both Miles and Galani's phone records.
They received information about location data from those phone records.
Technology has advanced so far in investigations over the last several years that, it's able to pinpoint humans wherever they are.
Galani's cell phone records indicated that he was not near Waterbury at the time. We believe that this occurred.
Cell phone data from his cell phone showed that he never left Staten Island. After that, Rachel's boyfriend was quickly ruled out.
However, when detectives review Miles's location data, they discover that he had in fact visited Rachel's apartment the night she disappeared.
At around midnight, July 10, we see his location going from Rachel's apartment right down to the area of Black Rock State Park where the remains were found.
Officers at that point believed that he was much more involved than he was initially indicating.
Coming up, a suspect breaks under interrogation.
He states that she becomes very aggressive. At one point, she's trying to hit him, and then at another point, he states she grabs a knife.
And as the pressure mounts, lovers begin to turn on each other.
They were really trying to point the finger at each other.
God is the only judge. But in life, you have to pay for your consequences.
Detectives have discovered evidence that 22-year-old Miles Johnson was likely the last person to see Rachel Sebet Layla alive before she went missing in July 2020.
The night that she goes missing, Miles' cell phone puts him at Rachel's apartment. And then during that night, his cell phone also pings near the area of Black Rock State Park where the body was recovered. It's a strong evidence to suggest that Miles was involved in Rachel's murder.
On September 23rd, detectives bring Miles in for a second round of questioning.
I ask him about having something more to do with Rachel the night of July 10th into the 11th, and he was just adamant that he did not see her, he wasn't there. It was right around 4 hours of the interview, I eventually have to start confronting him with what we found on his cell phone.
Detectives were showing he was near the area where the body was dumped.
His response is that someone either hacked his phone or took his phone. It couldn't be him.
It's not probable that your cell phone was hacked and they decided to input locations where human remains were found. So he has no real answer for any of the serious questions that I'm asking him. He's just really deflecting.
Eventually, towards the very end of the interview, he said he might have taken a romantic drive with his girlfriend out to that location, but he didn't really recall. And then shortly thereafter, he invoked his right to remain silent and chose not to speak any further.
So with the facts and circumstances we had up to this point, especially the technology aspect of it, the cell phone, we were able to secure an arrest warrant for Miles.
So at that point in time, he was served with his arrest warrant and he was sent to our booking area. Miles' reaction was really non-existent. He didn't have a, hey, that's not me, I didn't do it. He didn't have a upset reaction.
The following morning, while he's in the holding area, he sees me and he asks to speak with me again.
He wants to share some more information on Rachel and what happened to her.
So I bring him back to an interview room and I talk with him. Now during this interview is when he really starts to get Cassandra involved in the homicide.
Miles was kind of laying out how Cassandra was extremely upset at the circumstances that are disclosed to her about, the intimate relationship that Miles is having with Rachel.
So Miles tells me that right around midnight on July 10th, him and Cassandra Nazario go to Rachel's apartment, and he just wanted to talk to her about the relationship, kind of break it off and try to smooth everything over. He states Cassandra was waiting on the steps just outside the door. He states that when he confronts Rachel and he's having this conversation, she becomes very aggressive. And at one point, she's trying to hit him. And then at another point, he states she grabs a knife. Miles tries to tell me that him and Rachel are now struggling over this knife. And then he tells me that during this struggle, he describes Rachel kind of plunging the knife into her own neck. When he's telling me this, I'm not even remotely believing it, but I'm just letting him go on with it. You know, sometimes it's better to just let them keep talking and they're just gonna dig their own hole. Eventually, Cassandra comes into the apartment as well.
Mr. Johnson said Cassandra Nazario had come up into the apartment, and while Rachel was suffering from her knife wound, Cassandra had stabbed her several times and killed her. So Mr. Johnson tried to lay the blame of the murder completely at the feet of Cassandra Nazario. And he said she was a jealous female and was jealous of Rachel, and for that reason she had killed her.
Once Rachel is clearly dead, him and Cassandra proceed to tie her hands and feet together, and she was then wrapped in a series of black plastic bags and blankets. From there, they cleaned up the apartment and went to Black Rock State Park.
After Miles finishes his story, he's returned to lockup.
When I heard Miles was arrested, it was really shocking because he didn't give off the abusive, aggressive vibes, the type of person who you would consider to be a murderer. We couldn't believe, because all of us worked alongside Miles and Rachel. So it was a little bit strange.
Learning this new information that Miles provided to us, now Cassandra, she's in deep water. He has just, implicated her in this crime that really is involving him and his relationship with Rachel. So detectives were able to apprehend her, bring her back into the police department, interview her.
Detectives confront Cassandra with Miles's story.
She responds that she felt very much betrayed by him. She felt that she was the type of girlfriend who gave him everything over the years and he really gave her nothing back. So Cassandra stated that she wasn't taking the fall for it.
I believe her words are, "I don't want to go down for this." And at this point, she tells officers her version of events.
It just really turns into a blame game.
In September of 2020, Connecticut detectives are investigating the murder of Rachel Sebit-Layla and talking to 23-year-old Cassandra Nazario for the second time.
She indicated that she was not going to take the hit for what Miles Johnson had done, and then she gave a different version of events.
On July 10th, 2020, Rachel's boyfriend, Galani, calls Cassandra after he finds out about Rachel and Miles' affair.
When Cassandra found out about that, it fueled a lot of jealousy, it fueled a lot of hurt for her.
Cassandra says she confronted Miles immediately, which led to an explosive argument.
Her and Miles were having an argument based on Miles still being with Rachel.
She says they went for a drive to cool down later that night.
She stated that she wasn't aware that they were going to Rachel's at the time, but they end up outside of an apartment building, which turns out to be Rachel's.
Miles Johnson had gone to confront Rachel and tell him they were breaking up.
Then she follows Miles up the stairs to Rachel's apartment. She stated that Miles then went into the apartment.
She tells detectives that she initially does not go in the apartment.
She was waiting outside and she heard screaming and struggling.
Cassandra then states that she eventually hears the arguing stop, which makes her a little curious, and so she goes up to the door, and when she opens it up, she sees Rachel on the ground, Miles on top of her, with a knife in his hand.
She sees that Rachel has been stabbed.
There was just blood everywhere within the kitchen.
She indicated that Mr. Johnson told her to get a pillow because Rachel was still gurgling. She brought the pillow over to Miles Johnson and that he had finished killing her by suffocating her.
She claims to be in shock, now realizing that there's not much she could do. So she agrees then to help clean up and dispose of the body.
Cassandra tells us that her and Miles carry Rachel's body down the stairs to his SUV. Cassandra tells us that they drive out to Black Rock. Rachel is then dragged to the guardrails, and then she is pushed underneath the guardrails down an embankment into the woods. Cassandra states that once the body was dumped over at Black Rock, the two of them stop at a gas station. It was either for cigarettes or food in some capacity. And then from there, they go back to Miles Johnson's house, where they proceed to take off all their clothes, some of the cleaning supplies they use, and they burn them in a fire pit in his backyard. I have no reason to believe that she's not being truthful because the details were very gruesome. She didn't seem to really be holding anything back.
Once we learn of Cassandra's disclosures to detectives about her role in the homicide, we secured an arrest warrant for her, so she's, brought to court and she's arraigned.
Even though she didn't commit the crime, she was part of the crime, so Cassandra is still charged with Rachel's murder.
I really couldn't believe it. And, I know sometimes things happen outside of our control, but I was devastated. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. The first time I spoke with her, I feel like it was that night that I got the call they gave her. And I was hysterical, she was hysterical. And I just told her I'm gonna hire her an attorney.
In a case of he said, she said, authorities know that obtaining a conviction against both Cassandra and Miles may not be easy.
You got to make a deal with somebody, you know, because juries are tricky, and it's a chance you're taking.
At that point, offers were made for pleading guilty. Those offers were rejected by Mr. Johnson. His case was scheduled for trial, but Cassandra Nazario's attorney had indicated a willingness to cooperate with the state against Miles Johnson. At that time, we thought her only involvement was when she went into the apartment. She had gotten a pillow and given it to Miles Johnson, and then Miles Johnson had done all of the killing. So we were willing at that point to make a cooperation agreement where she'd still be punished on her manslaughter and use her testimony against Miles Johnson. When we met with Cassandra Nazario, the first thing we talk about in any cooperation agreement is you have to be completely truthful and completely honest. If you're not truthful and honest, we cannot use you, we will not use you.
At that point, she tells us her final version of what happened.
And I think then, you know, her mind starts to change gears a little bit, that she needs to tell the truth.
After arresting Cassandra Nazario and Miles Johnson for the murder of Rachel Sebet-Layla, authorities offer Cassandra a cooperation agreement in exchange for the truth. Cassandra tells prosecutors that it all started when Galani told her about Miles and Rachel's affair on July 10th. She alleges he also dropped 2 more bombshells.
Galani started telling Cassandra things like Rachel's pregnant with Miles' baby.
Cassandra, I guess, had been trying to get pregnant, but just wasn't able to. So this was extremely hurtful to Cassandra. She wanted so bad to start a family with Miles.
And at some point he said that Rachel may have transmitted to them a sexually transmitted disease.
According to Cassandra, this detail in particular made Miles furious.
They were upset about this, and that was their reason. Mr. Johnson decided that Rachel, quote, she must die. And at that point, they began planning her death that day. They had gone to several different stores that day, buying stuff to clean up the crime scene and to dispose of the body.
And they buy knives, they buy black clothing, and at night, they go to Rachel's house.
Miles Johnson went in first. He had a struggle with her. He stabbed her. At that point, Mr. Johnson involved Mr. Zario in the murder. He said, I want you to stab her. Mr. Zario said, I did.
She indicated that she proceeded to stab her multiple times.
We had told her she had to be honest, and she was, that she had been equally culpable in the killing. This was certainly new information we had, and based on that, we couldn't really make a deal with her for a manslaughter. There was no way we could not prosecute her for murder, since she's as equally involved as Miles Johnson. We had conversations with her lawyer after that. He agreed to plead guilty to murder, and she would testify against Miles Johnson.
So after we get this information from Cassandra, we take another look at the cell phone records.
And those phone records corroborated Cassandra's version, where they had gone to different stores that day.
In April 2023, Miles Johnson's case goes to trial.
During the trial, Miles was really trying to point the finger at Cassandra being the ringleader of the entire incident.
The nature of Mr. Johnson's defense was that Mr. Johnson was a victim of circumstance, and that Rachel actually stabbed herself in the neck, and that Cassandra Nazario had come in and killed her because she was jealous.
Miles definitely did blame it all on her. And I just thought, you're not taking any accountability. And she definitely took accountability for her role.
I think the primary motive in this case was that Miles Johnson and Cassandra Nazario were under the impression that Rachel may be pregnant and that there may be a sexually transmitted disease that was passed on to them.
When in fact, the autopsy confirmed Rachel was not pregnant.
And she didn't have a sexually transmitted disease.
I can only speak in my opinion that Miles and Cassandra must have had a tumultuous relationship prior to this happening. And when things like this happen, there's an affair involved and there's emotions involved. It doesn't take much to set these little things off and start a storm.
So Cassandra Nazario testified as to all the involvement she had, Mr. Johnson had, and then that was corroborated by the ME reports, the cuts in the clothes, the cell phone data records. We put on the best case we possibly could, but until they come back and say guilty, you're always going to be nervous about it.
In late April, the trial concludes.
The jury was out for about 10 hours, and the verdict was guilty on all counts against Miles Johnson. Miles Johnson was sentenced on August 2nd, 2023 to 55 years.
On August 14th, Cassandra Nazario was sentenced on the murder charge she had pled guilty to. She received a sentence of 25 years, which was the mandatory minimum sentence in Connecticut.
God is the only judge. But in life, you have to pay for your consequences. Someone lost their life, you need to be in jail.
You know, it's a terrible, tragic event, but in my opinion, justice was served in this case.
Rachel was young. She was full of life. There was no reason to have taken hers. For Rachel, there's just so much memories of Rachel that I just can't pick one. There really isn't. She was a great person, so a lot of things to remember her by. As the beautiful, fun-going, lovable person that she was.
January 5th, 1984. It was an ordinary evening in Catania, a city on the eastern coast of Sicily. Thousands of people were finishing dinner. Shops were closing. Traffic moved through familiar streets. Families prepared to end another winter day. Nothing about that evening suggested that it would soon become one of the most significant dates in the history of Italian journalism. At some point that night, a man left the offices of a magazine he had created with a clear purpose. He was not heading toward a secret meeting. He was not investigating a crime scene. He was not preparing to publish a breaking story. Instead, he was simply on his way to pick up his granddaughter from a performance at Teatro Verga. It was a routine family errand, the kind of task that millions of grandparents perform every day without a second thought. The man behind the wheel was Giuseppe Fava, known to friends and colleagues as Pippo Fava. He was 58 years old. He was a journalist, a writer, and a playwright. More importantly, he had become one of the most outspoken anti-mafia voices in Sicily. For years, he had dedicated his work to investigating something many people preferred not to discuss publicly. He wrote about the connections between organized crime, politics, and business. He examined relationships that powerful individuals would rather keep hidden. He asked questions that others considered dangerous. And he did so in a place where asking the wrong questions could carry consequences. As Fava drove through Catania that evening, there was no indication that his journey would never reach its intended conclusion. The city continued moving around him. Cars passed. Street lights illuminated the roads. Life unfolded as it always had. Yet somewhere within that ordinary landscape, someone had already decided that Giuseppe Fava would not survive the night. Around 10 o'clock, Fava arrived near Teatro Verga. He parked his Renault 5 close to the theater where his granddaughter was performing. The details of the next moments are brief, stark, and devastating. A gunman approached the vehicle. The attack was swift. Shots were fired through the window. According to reports, the weapon used was a 7.6 5mm pistol. The bullet struck Fava in the neck and head. The injuries were catastrophic. He died almost immediately. The entire attack lasted only moments. There was no prolonged confrontation, no dramatic chase, no opportunity for escape. A man who had spent years exposing hidden systems of power was silenced in a matter of seconds while sitting inside his car. The contrast is difficult to ignore. The victim was not killed while conducting an investigation. He was not surrounded by bodyguards or security measures. He was not standing behind a podium delivering a controversial speech. He was simply on his way to collect a family member. The violence arrived in the middle of an ordinary act of everyday life. In the aftermath, investigators faced a troubling reality. There were few direct witnesses. The attack had been carried out quickly and efficiently. Observers noted characteristics commonly associated with professional mafia assassinations in Sicily during that period. But suspicion and proof are not the same thing. Many people immediately believed they understood why Giuseppe Fava had been murdered. The challenge would be proving it, and proving it would take years. To understand why his death would resonate so deeply across Italy, it is necessary to understand the world in which he lived and worked. During the early 1980s, the city of Catania existed under the powerful influence of Cosa Nostra. The organization's presence shaped economic life, political relationships, and social realities across Sicily. Many individuals understood the risks of confronting powerful interests. Some chose silence. Others chose caution. Giuseppe Fava chose something else entirely. Through his magazine, Siciliani, he pursued investigations that examined the relationships between mafia figures, influential businessmen, and political actors. His reporting was not vague. It was not limited to general observations. He directed attention towards specific concentrations of power. He explored how influence moved between criminal organizations and legitimate institutions. His work suggested that organized crime could not be understood merely as a collection of criminals operating on society's margins. Instead, it existed within broader networks of money, authority, and influence. One of his most famous articles carried an unforgettable title, The Four Horsemen of the Mafia Apocalypse. In it, Fava accused four powerful businessmen in Catania of maintaining close relationships with mafia interests and local political figures. Such allegations were extraordinary. More importantly, they were public. The article became a symbol of the kind of journalism Fava practiced. He was willing to identify individuals whom many others avoided discussing. He was willing to connect names, influence, and power. He was willing to challenge narratives that had become accepted through repetition and silence. The consequences of that approach were predictable. Colleagues later recalled that Fava regularly received threats. Pressure surrounded his work. The dangers were not abstract. They were understood. Yet the threats did not stop him. His investigations continued. His criticism continued. His public appearances continued. In fact, only 1 week before his death, Giuseppe Fava appeared on national television. There, he made a statement that reflected the central theme of much of his work. He argued that the mafia was not simply a criminal organization operating independently from society. According to Fava, powerful individuals within Italian political life were also part of the broader reality he was describing. It was a bold assertion. It challenged comfortable assumptions. It suggested that the true reach of organized crime extended far beyond what many people were willing to acknowledge publicly. 1 week later, he was dead. Whenever a journalist is murdered, an uncomfortable question emerges. Was the killing intended only to eliminate a person, or was it intended to eliminate a voice? The distinction matters. A murder ends a life, but an assassination can carry a broader purpose. It can function as a message, a warning, a demonstration of power. In the case of Giuseppe Fava, that question would remain at the center of public discussion for years. Why was he killed? Who ordered it? Who carried it out? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly had he discovered that made him such a dangerous figure? These questions would not be answered quickly. The path toward justice would stretch across decades. Investigators would confront obstacles, silence, and uncertainty. Theories would circulate. Suspicions would harden. Yet definitive answers would remain frustratingly distant. For years, the case seemed trapped between what many people believed and what could actually be proven. Then, a decade later, a breakthrough would emerge from an unexpected source. A member of the mafia would come forward. A confession would reshape the investigation. Names would be identified. Alleged organizers would be accused. Trials would follow. Convictions would eventually be secured. But all of that still lay in the future on the night of January 5th, 1984. At that moment, there was only a parked Renault 5 near Teatro Verga. There was only a journalist who had spent years pursuing difficult truths. There was only a gunman approaching through the darkness. And there was the sound of gunfire that would echo far beyond the streets of Catania. The death of Giuseppe Fava was not merely the story of a homicide. It was the story of a confrontation between investigative journalism and organized power. It was the story of a man who continued speaking despite threats. It was the story of a society forced to ask whether truth could survive intimidation. And it was the story of a murder that would become one of the defining symbols of Italy's struggle against the mafia. Before we examine the investigation, before we follow the long road toward the courtroom, we must first understand the man at the center of all. Who was Giuseppe Pippo Fava? What kind of journalist chooses to challenge powerful interests in a climate of fear? And how did his work place him directly in the path of some of the most dangerous forces in Sicily? To answer those questions, we must go back to the beginning and explore the life, career, and convictions of the man whose final journey ended outside a theater on a winter night in Catania. Before Giuseppe Fava became a murder victim, before his name appeared in headlines discussing organized crime and justice, before investigators spent years attempting to identify those responsible for his death, he was a journalist. That simple description lies at the center of this story. It is impossible to understand the significance of his assassination without first understanding the kind of work he chose to do, the environment in which he did it, and the risks that accompanied every decision he made. Giuseppe Fava, often known by the nickname Pippo Fava, was born in 1925 in Palazzolo Aceride, a town in Sicily. Over the course of his life, he built a reputation that extended beyond journalism. He was also a writer and a playwright. His work demonstrated an interest in society, power, and human behavior. Yet among all of his accomplishments, it would be his role as an investigative journalist that ultimately defined both his legacy and his fate. By the early 1980s, Fava had become one of the most prominent anti-mafia voices in Sicily. That distinction was not merely a matter of personal opinion or political identity. It was rooted in the work he produced and the subjects he was willing to investigate. At a time when many people hesitated to discuss certain realities openly, Fava dedicated himself to examining them in detail. To appreciate the courage required for such work, one must first understand the context of Sicily during that period. The island occupied a unique place within Italy. It possessed a rich history, a strong cultural identity, and communities that had endured generations of economic and political change. Yet it was also a place where organized crime exerted significant influence. During the early 1980s, the city of Catania existed under the powerful presence of Cosa Nostra. The organization's influence extended beyond criminal activity itself. Its reach affected business relationships, political structures, and social dynamics. In such an environment, silence often became a survival strategy. Many people understood that some subjects were dangerous to discuss. Certain names carried weight. Certain connections remained unspoken. Certain questions could create consequences. The challenge was not simply identifying criminal behavior. The challenge was identifying how criminal influence interacted with legitimate institutions. It was this challenge that increasingly attracted Giuseppe Fava's attention. He did not view organized crime as an isolated phenomenon. He was interested in relationships. He was interested in networks. He was interested in understanding how power moved between different sectors of society. More importantly, he believed those relationships deserved public scrutiny. This belief became the foundation of one of his most important projects, the magazine I Siciliani. Fava founded the publication with a clear purpose. It would focus on investigative journalism. It would examine issues that many publications either ignored or approached cautiously. It would investigate the connections linking organized crime, politics, and business interests. The title itself reflected a broad concern with Sicilian society. Yet the magazine quickly became known for something more specific. It became a platform for exposing structures of power. Through I Siciliani, Fava and his colleagues pursued stories that challenged influential individuals and established interests. Such work demanded persistence. Investigative journalism rarely produces immediate results. Reporters must gather information, compare claims, identify inconsistencies, and present findings in a way that can withstand scrutiny. Every allegation carries responsibility. Every publication carries risk. For journalists examining organized crime, those risks can become particularly severe. Nevertheless, Fava continued. Over time, his reporting developed a reputation for confronting issues that others avoided. He focused not merely on criminal acts, but on relationships that connected criminal organizations to legitimate centers of authority. His investigations explored how influence, money, and power intersected. The implications of this work were significant. If organized crime operated through broader networks, then understanding those networks required examining individuals who occupied respected positions within society. Such investigations inevitably attracted attention. They also attracted opposition. Among Fava's most famous works was an article that became emblematic of his approach to journalism. Its title alone was striking: The Four Horsemen of the Mafia Apocalypse. The article accused four powerful businessmen in Catania of maintaining close relationships with both mafia figures and local political actors. The significance of this article cannot be measured solely by its content. Equally important was what it represented. Fava was not speaking in vague generalities. He was not discussing abstract concepts. He was directing public attention towards specific individuals who occupied influential positions within the economic life of the city. In doing so, he crossed a line that many people considered dangerous. Naming powerful individuals is fundamentally different from criticizing systems in the abstract. Systems do not sue. Systems do not threaten. Systems do not react personally. Individuals do. By identifying influential figures and questioning their relationships, Fava placed himself in direct opposition to people who possessed resources, influence, and connections. Whether every reader agreed with his conclusions was almost secondary to the larger point. He was willing to raise questions that many others refused to ask. That willingness became central to his identity as a journalist. Yet courage and danger often exist side by side. As his investigations continued, reports emerged that Fava regularly received threats. Colleagues later recalled that intimidation had become a recurring reality in his professional life. The details of those threats are less important than what they reveal. Someone wanted him to stop. Someone believed his work posed a problem. Someone hoped pressure might succeed where persuasion had failed. For many people, repeated threats would have prompted retreat. The risks were obvious. The potential consequences were impossible to ignore. Yet according to those who worked alongside him, Fava remained committed to his reporting. He continued publishing. He continued investigating. He continued speaking publicly about the issues that concerned him. This persistence is perhaps one of the most revealing aspects of his character. Courage is often misunderstood. Popular culture portrays courage as fearlessness. In reality, courage frequently involves recognizing danger and proceeding anyway. There is no evidence suggesting that Giuseppe Fava was unaware of the risks surrounding his work. On the contrary, the existence of threats indicates that those risks were impossible to ignore. Yet he chose not to abandon his investigations. Instead, he expanded them. As the years progressed, his public profile grew. His opinions reached audiences beyond the pages of I Siciliani. His criticism of organized crime became increasingly visible. This visibility culminated in a national television appearance shortly before his death. During that appearance, Fava articulated an idea that lay at the heart of his investigative work. He argued that the mafia should not be understood merely as a collection of criminals operating outside society. According to his view, powerful figures within Italian political life also formed part of the broader reality that needed examination. This was not a casual remark. It reflected years of reporting and observation. It challenged comfortable narratives that separated criminal organizations from legitimate institutions. It suggested that the true problem was more complex than many people preferred to admit. Such statements inevitably drew attention. They also reinforced the perception that Fava had become one of the most outspoken critics of entrenched power structures in Sicily. The timing of that television appearance would later acquire particular significance. It occurred only 1 week before his assassination. Looking back, the proximity of those events creates a haunting impression. A journalist publicly criticizing the influence of organized crime and powerful interests. Then, 7 days later, that journalist is dead. It is important, however, to avoid the temptation of hindsight. At the time, nobody could know what would happen next. For Fava, the television appearance was simply another opportunity to express concerns he had been articulating for years. Yet the appearance serves as a useful illustration of the position he occupied in Sicilian public life. He was no longer merely reporting on controversial issues. He had become a recognizable public voice discussing them. As his profile increased, so too did the stakes surrounding his work. The danger did not emerge from any single article or single investigation. Instead, it accumulated over time. Each publication added to a broader body of reporting. Each allegation contributed to a larger challenge against established power. Each public statement reinforced his refusal to remain silent. By the beginning of 1984, Giuseppe Fava stood at the center of an increasingly consequential conflict. On one side was a journalist dedicated to exposing connections between organized crime, business interests, and political influence. On the other side were powerful forces whose activities and relationships were becoming subjects of public scrutiny. The collision between those worlds had not yet reached its tragic conclusion. But the tension was already present. Threats had been made. Allegations had been published. Public criticism had intensified. The atmosphere surrounding Fava's work had become unmistakably dangerous. Yet despite everything, he continued. He continued editing his magazine. He continued supporting investigative journalism. He continued speaking openly about issues many considered untouchable. There is something profoundly human in that decision. Giuseppe Fava was not a symbol when he made those choices. He was not yet a martyr. He was not yet a historical figure. He was a working journalist carrying out the responsibilities he believed his profession required. He could not know that future generations would remember his name. He could not know that his murder would become one of the defining symbols of Italy's struggle against organized crime. He only knew the work in front of him. He only knew the stories he believed needed telling. And he only knew that, despite the risks, he intended to keep telling them. In the first days of January 1984, that commitment remained unchanged. The magazine continued operating. Life continued moving forward. Then came the evening of January 5th, a routine journey through the streets of Catania, a destination near Teatro Verga, a Park Brno 5, a waiting gunman, and a moment when years of investigation, controversy, and courage would collide with deadly violence. By the evening of January 5th, 1984, Giuseppe Fava had spent years doing work that placed him in direct confrontation with powerful interests. He had investigated the relationships between organized crime business, and politics. He had published allegations that attracted attention across Sicily. He had received threats. He had continued writing despite them. Yet on that particular night, none of those things appeared to define his immediate plans. He was not heading toward an interview. He was not preparing to meet a source. He was not traveling to investigate a new lead. Instead, he was carrying out a simple family responsibility. The ordinary nature of that task would later become one of the most haunting aspects of the entire case. Like many evenings before it, January 5th began as a normal day. The offices of I Siciliani continued their work. The routines of journalism moved forward. Articles required editing. Stories required attention. Deadlines remained as relentless as ever. For Giuseppe Fava, journalism was not an abstract ideal, but a daily profession. It involved meetings, writing, reviewing information, and managing a publication dedicated to investigative reporting. As the day drew to a close, however, his focus shifted away from the magazine. His granddaughter was participating in a performance at Teatro Verga in Catania, and he intended to pick her up afterward. There was nothing unusual about the plan. It was a family obligation. A grandfather collecting a granddaughter after an event. Such moments rarely become historical turning points. Yet history often reveals itself only in retrospect. What appears routine in the present can later become the final chapter of a life. At some point that evening, Giuseppe Fava left the offices of I Siciliani. The available facts concerning the final portion of his journey are limited, but the essential outline is clear. He departed from the magazine's office and traveled toward Teatro Verga. The route carried him through the streets of Catania, a city that had become central to both his professional work and the controversies surrounding it. Around him, life continued as usual. Vehicles moved through intersections. Pedestrians walked along sidewalks. Businesses prepared to close for the night. The city functioned according to its familiar rhythms. Nothing publicly signaled that a murder was about to occur. Yet somewhere within that same city, another sequence of events was unfolding. Someone was waiting. Someone knew where Giuseppe Fava would be. Someone was prepared to act. Shortly before 10 o'clock in the evening, Fava arrived near Teatro Verga. He parked his Renault 5 close to the theater. The vehicle would become the final location associated with his life. The significance of that image cannot be overstated. A parked car is one of the most ordinary sights imaginable. It suggests arrival. It suggests routine. It suggests the expectation that a journey will continue. In this case, however, the journey was about to end. The precise details of what happened next remain limited, but the central facts are well established. A gunman approached the vehicle. The attack was executed with speed and efficiency. There was no indication of a prolonged confrontation. No reports described struggle. No evidence suggests that Fava had any meaningful opportunity to react. The killer moved into position and opened fire through the window of the Renault 5. Reports indicate that the weapon used was a 7.6 5mm pistol. The shot struck Giuseppe Fava in the neck and head. The injuries were devastating. Death came almost immediately. The attack itself lasted only moments. Yet those moments would resonate across decades. Every homicide represents the end of a human life. Some murders, however, carry additional implications because of who the victim was and what the victim represented. Giuseppe Fava was not an anonymous target. He was a public figure. He was a journalist known throughout Sicily for investigating organized crime and its connections to powerful interests. His death immediately raised questions that extended far beyond the crime scene itself. Why had he been killed? Who had ordered the attack? Was the murder connected to his work? Those questions emerged almost as quickly as news of the assassination spread. But before investigators could answer them, they first had to confront the realities of the crime scene. One of the most significant challenges was the absence of direct witnesses. The attack had been carried out swiftly. Few people, if any, observed the entire sequence of events firsthand. This lack of eyewitness testimony complicated efforts to reconstruct every detail of the shooting. Investigators were left with physical evidence, known facts, and the broader context surrounding the victim's life. In many homicide cases, eyewitness accounts provide crucial leads. They can identify suspects, establish timelines, or clarify the sequence of events. In the murder of Giuseppe Fava, such immediate advantages were largely unavailable. The killer had acted quickly and disappeared. The crime scene revealed the result of the attack, but not necessarily the identity of the person responsible. This absence of immediate answers contributed to the atmosphere that followed the assassination. Shock spread through journalistic circles. Colleagues who had worked alongside Fava were forced to confront the reality that one of Sicily's most prominent investigative reporters had been murdered. The loss was both personal and professional. Friends mourn a colleague. Journalists recognized the broader implications of the attack. Anti-mafia activists viewed the killing as a disturbing development in an already dangerous struggle. Public reaction was shaped not only by the violence itself, but by the identity of the victim. If an investigative journalist, known for exposing powerful interests, could be murdered in such a direct manner, what message did that send to others engaged in similar work? Even before definitive evidence emerged, many observers suspected that the killing was related to Fava's reporting. Those suspicions did not arise randomly. They reflected years of public controversy surrounding his investigations. They reflected the threats colleagues said he had received. They reflected his willingness to identify influential individuals and discuss relationships between organized crime, business, and politics. Most importantly, they reflected the timing. Only 1 week before his death, Fava had appeared on national television criticizing the influence of the mafia and arguing that powerful figures within Italian society formed part of the problem. Then, 7 days later, he was shot dead. Such circumstances inevitably shaped public perception. Nevertheless, suspicion alone could not solve the case. Investigators required evidence. They required facts capable of surviving legal scrutiny. The challenge would be separating what seemed likely from what could actually be proven. In the immediate aftermath of the murder, however, observers focused on another aspect of the attack: its apparent professionalism. The shooting was carried out rapidly. The gunman approached, fired, and escaped. There was no indication of panic or improvisation. Many observers noted similarities between the killing and other mafia-style assassinations that had occurred in Sicily during that era. This observation did not constitute proof, yet it reinforced existing suspicions and influenced public discussion surrounding the case. To many people, the assassination appeared less like a spontaneous act of violence and more like a carefully executed operation. Whether that impression could be supported through evidence would become one of the central questions facing investigators. Meanwhile, the reality of Giuseppe Fava's death settled over Sicily. The man who had spent years investigating power had become the victim of a crime that seemed deeply connected to the very subjects he had explored. The irony was impossible to ignore. A journalist who examined the mechanisms of influence and intimidation had himself been silenced through violence. Yet even in death, the questions he raised refused to disappear. His articles remained. His investigations remained. His accusations remained part of the public record. In that sense, the assassination created a paradox. The apparent goal of such a killing would be silence. Yet the murder itself drew even greater attention to the issues that had defined Fava's work. As journalists, activists, and ordinary citizens attempted to understand what had happened, they inevitably revisited the investigations that had made him such a controversial figure. The result was that his death became inseparable from his reporting. Every discussion of the crime led back to the same fundamental issue. What had Giuseppe Fava discovered, revealed, or challenged that made him such a dangerous target? At the crime scene, however, those broader questions remained unanswered. There is only the immediate reality. A Renault 5 parked near Teatro Verga. A journalist mortally wounded by gunfire. A family expecting a grandfather who would never arrive. In a city confronted with a murder that would become one of the most significant symbols in Italy's struggle against organized crime. The attack had lasted mere seconds. The search for answers would last years. The gunshots outside Teatro Verga ended Giuseppe Fava's life on the night of January 5, 1984. But they also marked the beginning of another story, a long and difficult investigation shaped by suspicion, silence, frustration, and the relentless pursuit of proof. For a decade, crucial questions would remain unresolved. Then, in 1994, a dramatic breakthrough would transform the case and bring investigators closer than ever before to identifying those responsible for the assassination. That breakthrough would emerge from an unexpected source, a man who claimed he had been the shooter himself. The murder of Giuseppe Fava shocked Sicily, but shock alone could not solve a homicide. In the hours following the shooting outside Teatro Verga on January 5, 1984, investigators were confronted with a difficult reality. A prominent journalist had been assassinated in a manner that many observers immediately considered professional and deliberate. The victim was well known for his investigations into organized crime, political influence, and powerful business interests. Public suspicion emerged almost instantly. Yet suspicion is not evidence, and evidence would prove extraordinarily difficult to obtain. The first phase of the investigation was shaped by a question that seemed obvious on the surface, but was far more complicated in practice. Who had ordered the murder of Giuseppe Fava? Many people believe they already knew the answer. For years, Fava had challenged powerful interests through his reporting. He had openly criticized the influence of organized crime. He had published investigations examining relationships between mafia figures, politicians, and businessmen. He had received threats. To many observers, the possibility that his death was connected to his work appeared highly likely. However, criminal investigations are not built upon assumptions. Investigators required facts that could withstand scrutiny in court. They needed evidence capable of identifying specific individuals and establishing responsibility. Beyond speculation, the challenge was immense. The attack itself had been executed quickly. The gunman had approached the Renault 5, fired through the window, and disappeared. There were few direct witnesses. The efficiency of the operation created immediate obstacles for law enforcement. Unlike cases in which multiple witnesses provide detailed descriptions, the murder of Giuseppe Fava offered investigators very little in the way of immediate identification. The crime scene revealed the result of the attack, but it did not reveal the identity of the killer. As investigators examined the circumstances surrounding the homicide, one possibility consistently remained at the center of discussion: mafia involvement. The characteristics of the assassination appeared consistent with mafia-style killings that had occurred in Sicily during that era. Yet establishing such involvement required far more than recognizing similarities. Authorities needed proof linking specific individuals to the crime. This distinction would define the investigation for years. The problem was not a lack of theories. The problem was a lack of evidence capable of transforming those theories into legal conclusions. Another obstacle emerged from the broader environment in which the investigation unfolded. Sicily during that period was not simply confronting isolated criminal acts. Organized crime possessed influence that extended into various sectors of society. Fear often discouraged cooperation. Silence could become a form of self-protection. Individuals who possessed information might hesitate to share it. Potential witnesses might fear consequences. Those realities complicated many investigations involving organized crime. and the murder of Giuseppe Fava was no exception. The result was a frustrating period of uncertainty. Months passed, then years. Despite widespread suspicion that the murder was connected to the issues Fava had investigated throughout his career, the case remained unresolved. Questions continued to accumulate. Who had carried out the shooting? Who had organized it? What evidence existed beyond public suspicion? Why had a journalist become such an important target? For Fava's family, colleagues, and supporters, these unanswered questions represented a continuing source of pain. The murder had ended a life, but it had not produced clarity. The absence of definitive answers prolonged the sense of injustice surrounding the case. Every year that passed without resolution deepened frustration. Yet the significance of Giuseppe Fava's work prevented the case from disappearing from public consciousness. His reporting continued to be discussed. His articles remained available. His investigations continued to provoke debate. In a sense, the very issues he had spent years examining remained alive even after his death. People continued asking whether the connections he described between organized crime, business interests, and political power had played a role in his assassination. As the years passed, the investigation appeared increasingly trapped between public belief and legal proof. Many suspected that powerful forces were responsible. Yet suspicion alone could not sustain a prosecution. Without new evidence, the case risked becoming another unresolved chapter in Sicily's long struggle with organized crime. Then, approximately 10 years after the murder, the situation changed dramatically. In 1994, the investigation experienced a breakthrough that had eluded authorities for a decade. The turning point came from a source that transformed the entire direction of the case. Maurizio Evola. Evola was a member of the mafia who later chose to cooperate with judicial authorities. Such decisions can have enormous significance in investigations involving organized crime. Individuals who participate in criminal organizations often possess knowledge unavailable to outsiders. They may understand internal structures, chains of command, and operational details that remain hidden from investigators for years. In the case of Giuseppe Fava's murder, Evola's cooperation proved crucial. During his cooperation with authorities, Maurizio Evola made a stunning admission. He confessed that he was the gunman who had killed Giuseppe Fava. For investigators, this confession represented a major development. For years, the identity of the shooter had remained uncertain. Now an individual was claiming direct responsibility for carrying out the assassination. The significance of such a confession cannot be overstated. It transformed the investigation from one focused primarily on suspicion into one supported by insider testimony. Suddenly, authorities possessed information from someone who claimed to have participated directly in the crime itself. Yet the importance of Evola's statements extended beyond his admission that he had been a shooter. He also provided information regarding those he said had ordered the murder. According to Evola, the assassination had been carried out on the orders of mafia leadership. Specifically, he identified Benedetto Nitto Santapaola as the individual behind the order. This allegation marked another critical turning point in the investigation. For years, investigators had sought evidence connecting the murder to higher levels of organized crime. Evola's testimony offered precisely that connection. His statements suggested that the assassination was not the isolated decision of a single gunman, but rather part of a larger chain of command. Such claims required careful examination. Confessions alone are not automatically accepted as fact. Investigators needed to evaluate Evola's credibility, compare his statements with existing evidence, and determine whether his account could withstand legal scrutiny. Nevertheless, the impact of the confession was immediate. For the first time, authorities possessed a detailed narrative from someone claiming direct involvement in the crime. The investigation entered a new phase. No longer focused solely on identifying the shooter, Investigators could now examine the broader structure behind the assassination. Why had the murder been ordered? What motive explained the decision? How did the crime fit into the larger context of Giuseppe Fava's work? According to Avola's account, the answer centered on Fava's journalism. Prosecutors increasingly focus on the possibility that Fava had become a threat because of the investigations he was conducting. His reporting had examined relationships among mafia figures, construction interests, and politically connected individuals. His articles challenged influential people. His public statements criticized powerful structures. Viewed through this lens, the assassination appeared less like a random act of violence and more like an attempt to eliminate a troublesome voice. Investigators worked to build a case around this theory. The process required more than simply accepting Avola's version of events. Authorities needed to establish motive, responsibility, and organizational involvement. They needed to demonstrate that the murder had been ordered and carried out for specific reasons. Connected to Fava's work, the confession provided a framework. But prosecutors still faced the difficult task of converting that framework into a legally persuasive case. As evidence accumulated, the broader narrative became increasingly clear. Prosecutors argued that Giuseppe Fava's investigations had threatened powerful interests. By exposing connections among organized crime, business, and political influence, he had become a significant problem for individuals who preferred those relationships to remain hidden. According to this theory, his murder was intended to silence him permanently. The significance of this argument extended beyond the homicide itself. If prosecutors were correct, then the assassination represented not merely a personal attack on Giuseppe Fava, but an attack on investigative journalism. It suggested that violence had been used to suppress reporting and discourage scrutiny. Such implications gave the case national importance. It was no longer simply about identifying a killer. It was about understanding why the killing occurred and what it revealed about the relationship between organized crime and public accountability. By the mid-1990s, the investigation had traveled a remarkable distance from its starting point. For a decade, authorities had struggled with uncertainty. Then a confession transformed the landscape. Names were identified. Alleged organizers were accused. A motive was articulated. What had once seemed unreachable now appeared capable of being proven in court. Yet the investigation was only one part of the process. Establishing responsibility required more than identifying suspects. It required judicial proceedings, legal arguments, and the careful examination of evidence before court. The next chapter of the story would move from police files and witness statements into the courtroom itself. There, prosecutors would attempt to demonstrate that Giuseppe Fava had been murdered because his journalism threatened powerful criminal interests. The defense would challenge those claims. Judges would evaluate the evidence. And after years of uncertainty, the Italian justice system would finally begin determining who bore responsibility for one of the most consequential assassinations in the history of Italian journalism. The breakthrough that emerged in 1994 fundamentally changed the trajectory of the Giuseppe Fava murder case. For 10 years, the investigation had existed in a state of uncertainty. Public suspicion had long pointed toward organized crime. Yet suspicion alone could not produce convictions. The confession of Maurizio Avola transformed the situation by providing investigators with something they had lacked for a decade: direct testimony from an individual claiming to have participated in the assassination. However, the journey from confession to conviction was neither immediate nor automatic. In criminal cases involving organized crime, especially those carrying enormous public significance, every allegation must withstand intense legal scrutiny. The task before prosecutors was clear. They needed to demonstrate not only who had carried out the murder, but also who had ordered it and why it had occurred. The courtroom would become the arena where years of suspicion investigation, and testimony would be tested against the standards of Italian law. As judicial proceedings began to take shape, the central narrative advanced by prosecutors focused on a theme that had been present almost from the beginning of the case. Giuseppe Fava was not viewed as the victim of a random act of violence. According to the prosecution's theory, he had been targeted because of his work as an investigative journalist. For years, he had examined relationships among organized crime figures, influential businessmen, and political interests. His reporting had challenged powerful individuals. His articles had drawn public attention to subjects that many preferred to keep hidden. Prosecutors argued that this work had transformed him into a threat. The courtroom proceedings, therefore, became more than an examination of a homicide. They also became an examination of motive. Why would a journalist become the target of assassination? What circumstances could lead powerful individuals to view reporting as dangerous enough to justify murder? The prosecution sought to answer these questions by placing Fava's career at the center of the case. His investigations, his public criticism of organized crime, and his willingness to challenge influential figures formed an important part of the broader narrative presented before the court. Among the most significant pieces of evidence was the testimony of Maurizio Evola. His role in the proceedings was crucial because he claimed direct involvement in the crime itself. According to his confession, he was the gunman who had approached the Renault 5 near Teatro Verga on the night of January 5, 1984, and fired the shots that killed Giuseppe Fava. Such testimony carried obvious importance. For the first time, the judicial system possessed an account from someone claiming first-hand knowledge of the assassination. Yet testimony alone is never enough. Courts must determine whether a witness is credible. They must evaluate consistency, reliability, and supporting evidence, particularly in cases involving former members of criminal organizations. Judges face the difficult responsibility of distinguishing truthful cooperation from self-serving claims. Consequently, Evola's statements became the subject of careful examination. Prosecutors viewed his testimony as a critical link connecting the physical act of the murder to those who allegedly ordered it. The defense, meanwhile, had every reason to challenge both his credibility and his conclusions. Such scrutiny is a fundamental feature of the judicial process. Courts exist not merely to hear accusations, but to test them. The reliability of evidence must be examined from every angle before responsibility can be established. Beyond identifying himself as the shooter, Evola's testimony also addressed what investigators had long considered the most important question: who ordered the assassination? According to his account, the murder had been carried out under instructions originating from mafia leadership. Specifically, he identified Benedetto Nitto Santapaola as one of the key figures responsible for ordering the crime. This allegation elevated the case from a simple murder prosecution into a broader examination of organized criminal authority. If prosecutors could establish that the killing had been ordered rather than merely carried out by an individual acting independently, they would demonstrate the existence of a deliberate and coordinated decision to eliminate Giuseppe Fava. Another name emerged prominently during the judicial proceedings: Aldo Ercolano. Prosecutors alleged that he also played a role in organizing the assassination. As the case developed, the focus expanded beyond the actions of the gunman and toward the broader structure behind the crime. This reflected a central principle in organized crime prosecutions. The individual who pulls the trigger may be only one component of a larger operation. Courts therefore seek not only to identify the direct perpetrator, but also to determine whether others exercised authority, issued instructions, or facilitated the crime. The prosecution's theory presented the assassination as precisely such an operation. According to this view, Giuseppe Fava was murdered because his investigations threatened powerful interests connected to organized crime. His work examining links among mafia figures, business networks, and political influence had created a problem for individuals who benefited from secrecy. Eliminating him, prosecutors argued, was intended to remove that threat. This argument carried profound implications. It suggested that the murder was not motivated by personal conflict or spontaneous anger. Instead, it was portrayed as a calculated effort to silence a journalist. The courtroom thus became a place where two interconnected questions were examined simultaneously. The first concerned responsibility: who organized and carried out the murder? The second concerned motive: why was Giuseppe Fava targeted? Over the course of the proceedings, judges were required to assess evidence addressing both issues. The significance of the case extended far beyond those directly involved. Journalists throughout Italy followed developments closely. Anti-mafia activists viewed the proceedings as a test of the state's ability to confront organized crime. Supporters of Fava hoped the courts would finally provide answers after years of uncertainty. Every stage of the judicial process attracted attention because the outcome would carry symbolic as well as legal importance. If convictions were secured, they would represent more than punishment for a homicide. They would constitute official recognition of the circumstances surrounding one of Italy's most significant attacks on investigative journalism. As the evidence was examined and arguments presented, the court gradually moved toward its conclusions. Ultimately, the judicial system accepted the core elements of the prosecution's case. Maurizio Avola was recognized as the gunman who had carried out the assassination. Benedetto Nitto Santapaola was found responsible as one of the organizers behind the murder. Aldo Ercolano was also found responsible as a co-organizer. These findings represented a decisive moment in a case that had remained unresolved for years. For the first time, the Italian justice system formally identified not only the individual who had committed the killing, but also those deemed responsible for directing it. Yet the legal process did not end with the initial verdicts. In major criminal cases, particularly those involving organized crime and life sentences, appeals play a critical role. Appellate courts review legal reasoning, examine procedural issues, and evaluate whether convictions are supported by the evidence. Such review serves as an essential safeguard within the justice system. It ensures that verdicts are not based solely on public opinion or emotional reaction, but on evidence capable of surviving rigorous legal examination. Consequently, the case continued through additional stages of judicial review. The passage of time became one of the defining characteristics of the pursuit of justice in the Fava case. Years had already passed between the assassination and the breakthrough provided by Avola's confession. More years would pass as the legal process unfolded. For observers, the length of the proceedings could be frustrating. Yet the complexity of organized crime prosecutions often demands patience. Establishing responsibility for crimes involving hierarchical criminal organizations is rarely straightforward. Evidence must be gathered, tested, challenged, and evaluated repeatedly. Eventually, the case reached its most significant judicial milestone. In 2003, Italy's Supreme Court confirmed the life sentences imposed on Benedetto Nitto Santapaola and Aldo Ercolano. This decision carried enormous importance. It represented the final affirmation of the judicial conclusions reached after years of investigation and litigation. The highest court in the country had reviewed the case and upheld the convictions. With that decision, one of the longest and most significant chapters in the search for justice finally approached its conclusion. Nearly 2 decades had passed since Giuseppe Fava was murdered outside Teatro Verga. During those years, uncertainty had gradually given way to evidence. Evidence had given way to prosecution, and prosecution had given way to judgment. The process was lengthy, but it ultimately produced formal legal accountability. The significance of those verdicts extended beyond the individuals convicted. They also provided an official acknowledgement of what many had suspected from the beginning, that the assassination was connected to the work Giuseppe Fava had devoted his life to pursuing. The courts concluded that the murder was not an isolated act, but part of a deliberate effort carried out through organized criminal authority. For Fava's family, colleagues, and supporters, the verdicts could never reverse the loss suffered on January 5, 1984. No judicial decision can restore a life. No sentence can erase the years of grief experienced by those left behind. Yet justice systems are not designed to reverse tragedy. Their purpose is to establish responsibility and affirm the rule of law. In that respect, the outcome of the Fava case carried profound significance. It demonstrated that even crimes committed by powerful criminal organizations could eventually be investigated, prosecuted, and judged. The convictions also transformed the assassination into something larger than a solved homicide. The case became a symbol. It illustrated the dangers faced by journalists who challenge powerful interests. It revealed the lengths to which organized crime might go to silence criticism. And it demonstrated the persistence required to pursue accountability when answers are obscured by fear. Influence in time. By 2003, the courts had delivered their final conclusions. The legal battle was largely over. Yet the story of Giuseppe Fava was far from finished. His death had already become part of Italy's broader struggle against organized crime. His work continued to inspire journalists. His magazine remained a symbol of independent reporting. And his assassination, once intended to silence a voice, had instead become a lasting reminder of the importance of speaking the truth. The final chapter of this story, therefore, lies not in the courtroom, but in the legacy left behind, an enduring legacy shaped by courage, sacrifice, memory, and the continuing fight against the forces Giuseppe Fava spent his life confronting. When the Italian Supreme Court confirmed the convictions in 2003, nearly 20 years had passed since the night Giuseppe Fava was murdered outside Teatro Verga. 2 decades is a long time in any criminal case. It is long enough for cities to change, for generations to grow older, for memories to fade, and for public attention to shift toward newer events. Yet some crimes refuse to disappear into history. Some crimes remain relevant because they represent something larger than the act itself. The assassination of Giuseppe Fava became one of those cases. The gunshots that ended his life on January 5, 1984, were intended to silence a journalist. Instead, they transformed him into one of the most enduring symbols of the struggle against organized crime in modern Italian history. To understand the lasting impact of his death, it is important to consider what Giuseppe Fava represented before he became a symbol. He was not merely a victim. He was a working journalist who believed that the public had a right to understand how power operated. His investigations focused on relationships that many people preferred not to discuss openly. Through I Siciliani, he explored connections among organized crime, political influence, and business interests. He challenged assumptions. He asked difficult questions. He directed attention toward individuals and structures that occupied positions of authority. None of these actions guaranteed fame. None guaranteed safety. Yet they reflected a conviction that journalism carried responsibilities extending beyond simple reporting. In the years following his death, that conviction became an essential part of his legacy. One of the most immediate consequences of the assassination was its effect on journalism itself. The murder demonstrated the risks that investigative reporters could face when examining powerful interests. For many observers, the killing served as a warning. It illustrated the potential consequences of challenging individuals who possessed influence, resources, and connections. The message appeared clear. There were subjects considered dangerous. and there are people willing to use violence to protect them. Yet history often produces unexpected outcomes. While the assassination undoubtedly revealed the dangers surrounding investigative journalism, it also reinforced the importance of the work itself. The very fact that a journalist had been targeted raised a troubling question. If reporting could provoke such an extreme response, what did that suggest about the information being reported? In this way, the murder drew additional attention to the issues Giuseppe Fava had spent years investigating. Rather than erasing public interest, the assassination intensified it. The attempt to silence one voice encouraged others to listen more closely to what that voice had been saying. This dynamic became particularly visible among younger journalists. Many reporters who had worked with Fava or been influenced by his example continued pursuing investigative journalism after his death. They carried forward principles that had defined his career: persistence, scrutiny, and a willingness to examine uncomfortable truths. The continuation of that work represented one of the most significant aspects of his legacy. Organized crime can eliminate individuals. It is far more difficult to eliminate ideas. The values associated with Giuseppe Fava's journalism survived because others chose to continue applying them. The magazine I Siciliani also became part of this enduring legacy. Before the assassination, it had been known as a publication dedicated to investigative reporting. After the assassination, it acquired additional meaning. It came to symbolize independent journalism and resistance to intimidation. Its existence served as a reminder that reporting could challenge powerful interests even under difficult circumstances. More broadly, the publication represented the belief that public accountability requires information. Citizens cannot evaluate institutions, leaders, or systems if critical facts remain hidden. By dedicating itself to investigative work, I Siciliani embodied a principle that extended far beyond Sicily itself. The significance of Giuseppe Fava's death also grew within the broader anti-mafia movement. Italy's struggle against organized crime has involved numerous journalists, investigators, judges, and activists who confronted dangerous adversaries. Within that larger history, Fava's assassination became a defining episode. He was remembered not simply because he was murdered, but because of the reasons prosecutors argued he had been targeted. According to the judicial conclusions reached in the case, his work had threatened powerful criminal interests. His death, therefore, came to symbolize the broader conflict between transparency and secrecy, between accountability and intimidation. Over time, commemorations emerged to preserve that memory. Organizations throughout Sicily continued honoring Giuseppe Fava and the principles he represented. Annual events were organized to remember his life and contributions. Such commemorations serve important functions. They preserve historical memory. They remind communities of past struggles. They ensure that significant events are not forgotten. In the case of Giuseppe Fava, remembrance became an act of resistance against the very objective the assassination appeared designed to achieve. A murder intended to silence a journalist instead guaranteed that future generations would continue discussing his work. There is a profound irony in that outcome. Violence often seeks immediate results. It attempts to remove obstacles, eliminate opposition, or suppress criticism. Yet violence can also produce consequences that extend far beyond the intentions of those who employ it. The individuals responsible for Giuseppe Fava's assassination succeeded in ending his life. They did not succeed in erasing his influence. If anything, the murder ensured that his name would remain permanently associated with the values he defended. The contrast between those two outcomes reveals much about the limits of intimidation. Fear can silence some voices. It cannot permanently silence an idea whose importance becomes evident to others. Several facts surrounding the case continue to resonate because of their emotional and symbolic. Power. The first is the simple reason Giuseppe Fava was traveling that evening. He was not participating in an investigation. He was not attending a political event. He was on his way to pick up his granddaughter after a performance. The ordinary nature of that purpose underscores the human tragedy at the center of the story. Behind every public figure exists a private life. Behind every journalist exists a family. The assassination interrupted not only a career, but also a relationship between a grandfather and the people who loved him. The second haunting detail concerns timing. Only 1 week before his death, Fava publicly criticized mafia influence on national television. He argued that organized crime could not be understood merely as a collection of criminals operating independently from society. Instead, he suggested that powerful figures occupied important positions within the broader system. Whether viewed as journalism, analysis, or warning, those remarks acquired extraordinary significance after the assassination. The third detail involves the nature of his reporting. Giuseppe Fava was willing to identify influential individuals and discuss relationships that many people feared mentioning publicly. Such actions distinguished him from observers who limited themselves to general criticism. His investigations sought specificity. They sought names, connections, and accountability. That willingness to move beyond abstraction made his work particularly significant and, according to prosecutors, particularly dangerous. The fourth, and perhaps most remarkable detail, concerns time itself. Nearly 20 years passed before the legal process fully established responsibility for the assassination. The length of that journey illustrates the challenges involved in confronting organized crime. Through lawful means, investigations require evidence. Courts require proof. Justice systems require procedures. These processes can be frustratingly slow, especially in cases involving secrecy and criminal organizations. Yet the eventual outcome demonstrated that persistence can produce results even when immediate answers seem impossible. Looking back today, Giuseppe Fava occupies a unique place in Italian history. He is remembered as one of the country's most important anti-mafia journalists. That reputation is not based solely on the circumstances of his death. It is rooted in the work he performed while alive. His articles, investigations, and public statements established the foundation of his legacy long before the assassination occurred. The murder amplified public awareness of that work, but it did not create its significance. The significance already existed because of the questions he chose to ask and the subjects he chose to investigate. Ultimately, the story of Giuseppe Fava is not merely a story about crime. It is also a story about responsibility. It raises questions that remain relevant far beyond Sicily, far beyond Italy, and far beyond the year 1984. What obligations do journalists have when confronting powerful interests? What risks accompany the pursuit of public accountability? How should societies respond when violence is used to suppress information? These questions have no simple answers, but they remain central to understanding why the case continues to matter. In the end, perhaps the most powerful image is the simplest one. A Renault 5 parked near Teatro Verga on a winter evening. A journalist arriving to collect his granddaughter. A life interrupted by violence. For a brief moment, it may have appeared that the gunman achieved his objective. Giuseppe Fava would never publish another article. He would never conduct another investigation. He would never speak publicly again. Yet history reached a different conclusion. The articles remained. The questions remained. The principles remained. Journalists continued reading his work. Citizens continued discussing his ideas. Anti-mafia organizations continued honoring his memory. Courts eventually established responsibility for his murder. And generation after generation learned the story of a man who refused to stop asking difficult questions. The assassination of Giuseppe Fava was intended to silence a journalist. Instead, it ensured that his voice would be remembered long after the gunshots faded into history. That is the enduring legacy of Giuseppe Pippo Fava, a reminder that truth can be attacked, delayed, and challenged, but it is far more difficult to erase. And as long as his story continues to be told, the attempt to silence him remains incomplete. In many true crime stories, the final chapter belongs to the verdict. The courtroom doors close, the sentences are handed down, and the narrative reaches its legal conclusion. The names of the guilty are recorded, the files are archived, and history moves forward. But some cases refuse to end there. Some stories continue long after the final judgment because their true significance extends beyond the crime itself. The assassination of Giuseppe Fava is one of those stories. The legal proceedings eventually identified the gunman. The courts eventually determined who had organized the murder. The Italian justice system ultimately reached its conclusions after years of investigation, testimony, and appeals. Yet if the story ended only with convictions, it would overlook the reason the case still matters decades later. The reason Giuseppe Fava remains remembered is not simply because he was murdered. Many victims of violence are forgotten by history. Their names fade as new events replace old headlines. Fava's name endured because his life represented something larger than his death. To understand that distinction, it is worth returning one final time to the central paradox of the case. The assassination appears to have been intended as an act of silence. According to the findings that emerged from the investigation and the courts, Fava's work had become a threat. His reporting examined relationships that powerful interests preferred not to see exposed. His articles challenged influence. His public statements questioned accepted narratives. If the motive identified by prosecutors was correct, then the murder was meant to remove a troublesome voice from public life. On the most immediate level, that objective succeeded. Giuseppe Fava never returned to the newsroom. He never published another investigation. He never wrote another editorial. He never appeared on television again. The physical reality of the crime cannot be denied. A life ended on the night of January 5th, 1984. Yet history often judges events differently from those who initiate them. The people responsible for the assassination may have succeeded in ending a life, but they failed to control what happened afterward. They failed to control memory. They failed to control public discussion. They failed to control the meaning that future generations would assign to the crime. In the years following the murder, Giuseppe Fava gradually became more than a journalist. He became a symbol. That transformation did not happen overnight. Symbols are created through remembrance. They emerge when societies repeatedly return to a story because they believe it contains an important leçon. In Fava's case, the lesson was not merely about organized crime. It was about the relationship between truth and power. Throughout history, there have been individuals who discovered that asking questions can be dangerous. Not because questions themselves possess power, but because answers sometimes do. Information can challenge authority. Information can expose contradictions. Information can force accountability. Journalism, at its best, operates on that principle. It asks questions not because questions are comfortable, but because they're necessary. Giuseppe Fava dedicated his career to that idea. The details of his investigations belong to a specific place and time. Early 1980s, Sicily was the environment in which he worked. Catania was the city where he published. Cosa Nostra was the criminal organization whose influence concerned him. Yet the broader principle behind his work transcends geography. Every society depends, to some extent, on individuals willing to examine how power operates. Without scrutiny, influence becomes invisible. Without information, accountability becomes impossible. This reality explains why the murder resonated so deeply within journalism. Reporters understood that the attack was directed not only at a person, but also at a profession. The assassination raised uncomfortable questions about the risks associated with investigative reporting. If exposing powerful interests could result in death, what did that imply about the importance of the information being exposed? The question remains relevant today because journalism continues to depend upon people willing to confront uncomfortable subjects. Fava's story reminds us that the search for truth is not always welcomed by those who benefit from secrecy. There is another reason the case continues to hold significance. It demonstrates the difference between immediate power and lasting influence. Organized crime often relies on the ability to create fear. Fear can produce silence. It can discourage cooperation. It can persuade people to avoid dangerous subjects. In the short term, fear can appear extremely effective. Yet fear possesses an important limitation. It cannot permanently erase ideas that others decide to preserve. Giuseppe Fava's work survived because people continued reading it. His legacy survived because journalists continued discussing it. His memory survived because organizations, colleagues, and citizens refused to forget. In this sense, the story becomes one of endurance. The forces responsible for the assassination possessed the ability to commit violence. They did not possess the ability to determine how history would remember the victim. That distinction matters. Criminal organizations often seek control. They seek influence over behavior, information, and public perception. Yet memory remains difficult to control. Once a story becomes part of public consciousness, it can outlive those who attempted to suppress it. The decades following Fava's death provide evidence of this phenomenon. Every commemoration, every article about his life, every discussion of his investigations represents a continuation of the conversation his killers sought to end. The irony is profound. The assassination that was intended to eliminate attention ultimately generated more of it. The murder transformed a respected Sicilian journalist into an internationally recognized symbol of resistance to organized crime. This transformation also reveals something important about courage. Courage is often described in dramatic terms, as though it consists of extraordinary acts performed by extraordinary people. Yet the life of Giuseppe Fava suggests a more complicated reality. Much of his courage appeared in ordinary decisions. Choosing to publish an article. Choosing to continue investigating. Choosing not to retreat in response to threats. Choosing to speak publicly about issues he believed mattered. These choices may appear simple when viewed individually. Together, however, they formed a pattern of persistence that defined his career. The significance of those choices became apparent only later when the consequences emerged. Another aspect of the story deserves attention. Giuseppe Fava never lived to see the outcome of the investigation. He never heard Maurizio Evola's confession. He never witnessed the trials. He never saw the convictions confirmed by Italy's Supreme Court in 2003. Like many victims of assassination, he was denied the opportunity to witness the legal resolution of his own case. This reality introduces a sobering element into the narrative. Justice, when arrived too late for the person whose life had been taken. Yet justice can still matter even when it comes late. It matters because it establishes truth within the public record. It matters because it rejects impunity. It matters because it demonstrates that time does not automatically erase responsibility. The nearly 20-year journey from murder to final judicial confirmation reflects the persistence required in such cases. It illustrates how difficult it can be to investigate crimes involving organized criminal structures. But it also illustrates something else, the determination of institutions, investigators, and citizens who refuse to abandon the search for answers. Looking back from the present, it is possible to see the assassination of Giuseppe Fava as both a tragedy and a warning. It is a tragedy because a human life was taken. A family lost a loved one. Colleagues lost a friend. Journalism lost an important voice. But it is also a warning because it demonstrates what can happen when criminal influence becomes powerful enough to view public scrutiny as a threat. The story encourages vigilance. It reminds societies that transparency and accountability cannot be taken for granted. They require protection. They require institutions willing to enforce the law. And they require individuals willing to ask questions, even when those questions create discomfort. Perhaps that is why the image of the final evening remains so powerful. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is ordinary. A grandfather driving to collect his granddaughter. A Park Renault 5. A destination only moments away. The scene contains none of the spectacle often associated with historical events. Yet within that ordinary moment lies the entire meaning of the case. Violence interrupted a routine act of family life. A journalist's career ended in a matter of seconds. And a city was forced to confront the reality that truth-telling could carry deadly consequences. But there is another image that deserves equal attention. It is not an image of death, but of continuation. It is the image of young journalists reading about Giuseppe Fava years later. It is the image of commemorations held in his honor. It is the image of citizens discussing the issues he investigated. It is the image of a society refusing to allow intimidation to dictate memory. That image may be less dramatic than the crime itself, but it is ultimately more important. Crimes belong to the past. Legacies belong to the future. Today, Giuseppe Pippo Fava is remembered as one of the most important anti-mafia journalists in Italian history. Not because he sought martyrdom, not because he expected to become a symbol, but because he chose to continue his work despite pressure and threats. His legacy was built through journalism long before it was reinforced by tragedy. The assassination made his name famous. The work made his name meaningful. And so this story ends where it began, with a journalist and a question. Not the question of who killed Giuseppe Fava. The courts eventually answered that. Not the question of why he was targeted. The investigation provided its conclusion. The enduring question is simpler and more universal. What happens when a society decides whether truth is worth defending? Giuseppe Fava answered that question through the choices he made during his life. Others answered it through the determination to seek justice after his death. And every generation that continues to remember his story provides its own answer as well. Because in the end, the most remarkable fact about Giuseppe Fava is not how he died. It is that decades after the gunshots outside Teatro Verga, people are still listening to what he had to say. There are crimes that shock because of their brutality. There are crimes that fascinate because of their mystery. And there are crimes that endure because they force society to confront uncomfortable truths about itself. The assassination of Giuseppe Pippo Fava belongs to the third category. Decades have passed since the winter night when a gunman approached a Renault 5 parked near Teatro Verga in Catania and fired the shots that ended the journalist's life. The investigation has been completed. The courts have spoken. The individuals identified as responsible have been judged. Yet the story remains alive because it was never solely about a murder. It was about the conflict that existed long before the trigger was pulled and long after the courtroom proceedings ended. At the center of that conflict stood a simple but dangerous idea: the belief that the public has the right to know how power operates. Throughout his career, Giuseppe Fava pursued that idea with unusual determination. He investigated relationships that many preferred to ignore. He examined links among organized crime, business interests, and political influence. He challenged assumptions that allowed powerful structures to remain hidden from scrutiny. Most importantly, he refused to accept that fear should determine what journalists are allowed to investigate. This refusal ultimately became the defining characteristic of both his life and his legacy. Looking back today, It is tempting to view the story through the lens of inevitability. The threats, the investigations, the public criticism. The television appearance 1 week before the assassination. These events appear to form a clear path toward tragedy. Yet history rarely feels inevitable to those living through it. Giuseppe Fava did not know he was approaching the final days of his life. He did not know that future generations would study his articles. He did not know that his name would become associated with the struggle against organized crime. He was simply continuing his work. That reality matters because it reminds us that courage often appears ordinary in the moment. Courage is not always a dramatic act performed under extraordinary circumstances. Sometimes it consists of returning to work despite pressure. Sometimes it means continuing an investigation despite threats. Sometimes it means speaking publicly about a subject others consider untouchable. The people who display such courage rarely know how history will remember them. They're focused on the immediate task before them. Giuseppe Fava was no exception. His significance emerged not from a single heroic moment, but from years of persistence. One of the most striking aspects of the case is how clearly it illustrates the relationship between journalism and accountability. Every society contains concentrations of power. Some power is visible. Some operates quietly. Some functions through institutions. Some exist through networks of influence. Journalism plays a unique role because it attempts to make those structures visible. It asks questions. It gathers information. It challenges official narratives when evidence suggests those narratives are incomplete. This function is not always welcomed. Individuals and organizations that benefit from secrecy rarely appreciate scrutiny. Yet, without scrutiny, citizens lose the ability to understand the forces shaping their lives. In this sense, the story of Giuseppe Fava extends beyond Sicily and beyond Italy. It touches upon a universal issue. What happens when individuals attempt to expose information that powerful interests would rather keep hidden? The answer varies depending on circumstances. But history offers many examples in which truth-telling has carried risks. The case of Giuseppe Fava reminds us that those risks can become extreme when organized criminal power intersects with economic and political influence. It also reminds us why investigative journalism remains necessary despite those risks. Another lesson emerges from the extraordinary length of the legal process. Nearly 20 years passed before Italy's Supreme Court confirmed the final convictions in the case. For victims' families, such delays can be agonizing. For the public, they can create frustration. Yet the passage of time also reveals something important about justice. Criminal organizations often depend upon secrecy, fear, and silence. These factors can slow investigations and complicate prosecutions. The search for accountability becomes difficult precisely because those responsible possess strong incentives to conceal their actions. The eventual outcome of the Fava case demonstrates that persistence can matter as much as speed. The investigation did not succeed immediately. It succeeded because people continued pursuing answers long after the crime itself had faded from the headlines. Maurizio Evola's confession in 1994 represented a turning point, but it did not emerge in isolation. It became meaningful because investigators, prosecutors, and institutions remained committed to resolving the case. The broader implication is clear. Justice is often imperfect, is often slow, yet abandoning the pursuit of truth guarantees failure, whereas persistence at least creates the possibility of success. The story also reveals the limitations of violence as a tool of control. Violence can eliminate individuals. It can create fear. It can discourage opposition. But it possesses a fundamental weakness. It cannot fully determine how future generations interpret events. Those responsible for Giuseppe Fava's assassination may have intended to silence him permanently. Instead, They contributed to the creation of a legacy that outlived them. Every article written about Fava, every commemorative event, every discussion of his work represents a continuation of a conversation that violence failed to stop. This outcome illustrates a recurring pattern throughout history. Attempts to suppress information often increase public interest in the very subjects being suppressed. The effort to erase a voice can transform that voice into a symbol. Symbols possess a kind of durability that individuals do not. They survive because communities continue assigning meaning to them. Giuseppe Fava became such a symbol not merely because he died, but because people recognized something important in the life he lived. They recognized commitment. They recognized integrity. They recognized the willingness to confront difficult realities despite personal risk. For journalists, his story serves as a reminder of the profession's responsibilities. Journalism is not simply the transmission of information. At its best, it is a form of public service. It helps citizens understand the systems influencing their lives. It provides information necessary for accountability. It challenges secrecy when secrecy protects wrongdoing. These functions become particularly important in environments where power operates without adequate scrutiny. Giuseppe Fava's career embodied this understanding of journalism. His work was not focused on comfort. It was focused on examination. He sought to understand how influence moved through society and who benefited from it. The consequences of that work ultimately proved fatal. But the work itself continues to be remembered precisely because it addressed issues that mattered. For ordinary citizens, the case offers a different lesson. It demonstrates that the struggle against organized crime is not solely a matter for police officers, judges, or prosecutors. It also involves public awareness. Criminal organizations derive strength from silence and ignorance. When citizens understand how power functions, opportunities for accountability increase. Information alone cannot solve every problem, but ignorance almost guarantees that problems will persist. This reality helps explain why attacks on journalists are often attacks on the public as well. The intended victim may be an individual reporter, but the broader target is society's ability to know and understand the truth. Perhaps the most moving aspect of a story is its human dimension. Historical narratives sometimes transform victims into symbols so completely that their humanity fades from view. It is important not to allow that to happen here. Giuseppe Fava was a journalist, but he was also a father, a grandfather, a colleague, and a friend. On the night of January 5th, 1984, he was traveling to pick up his granddaughter from a performance. That simple fact cuts through the political, legal, and historical dimensions of the case. It reminds us that every public tragedy is also a private one. Behind every headline exists a family forced to live with loss. Behind every criminal investigation exists a life that cannot be restored. The judicial process can establish responsibility, but it cannot reverse what happened. Recognizing this reality deepens our understanding of the true cost of violence. In the end, the story of Giuseppe Fava leaves us with a series of enduring questions. What responsibilities accompany the possession of information? What obligations do journalists have when confronting powerful interests? How should societies respond when violence is used to silence criticism? And perhaps most importantly, what kind of future becomes possible when citizens refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths? These questions remain relevant because the issues they address have not disappeared. Power still exists. Secrecy still exists. Organized crime still exists. The need for accountability still exists. Consequently, the legacy of Giuseppe Fava remains more than a historical memory. It remains a challenge directed toward every generation that inherits the institution's freedoms and responsibilities of public life. The final image of this story is not the crime scene outside Teatro Verga. It is not the courtroom where convictions were eventually confirmed. It is not even the pages of I Siciliani where many of Fava's most important investigations appeared. The final image is something simpler. It is the image of a question being asked. A difficult question, an inconvenient question, a question directed toward power by someone unwilling to accept silence as an answer. That image captures the essence of Giuseppe Fava's life more accurately than any monument or memorial ever could. Because long before he became a symbol, he was a journalist. And long after the gunshots of January 1984 faded into history, the questions he asked continue to echo. That is why his story endures. That is why his name is remembered. And that is why the assassination of Giuseppe Pippo Fava remains not only a true crime case, but also a lasting testament to the enduring value and the enduring cost of seeking the truth.